Hello, everyone, and welcome to Forge & Foster's Q1 Hamilton Market Update. My name is Alex Noilovich. I'm the Director of Strategy and Research at Forge & Foster, and really excited to be here today. We had a fantastic Q4 and just overall year to 2021. It was a record year, both for 2021 and for the quarter itself of Q4. And I was really interested to see if that momentum is going to carry over into Q1. And we have a lot to go through. I'm going to start by really showing a lot of the analysis and that took place in Hamilton. And in the latter half of the presentation, we'll go into the developments, we'll go into the news and kind of weave in, as I think so there's some parallels there that'll be really nice to touch on both. But to begin, commercial real estate volume, we saw a huge number for Q1. If you see at the very bottom right there, about $350 million worth of commercial real estate transacted in Q1 for 2022, phenomenal value. When you look at the previous quarter, 574, maybe it looks a bit muted, but keep in mind, last quarter was a record quarter. It was a record year too for 2021. Q4s are typically have larger values compared to Q1s. Q1s are actually the weakest. And then when you look at year over year, which is the top there, so Q1 of 2021, it was actually very good value. They had 281, we're about 250, so about $70 million worth of extra value year over year, which is very, very good to see. Especially when you look at other quarters. So on the very right here, we have Q1 of 2022. And you can see how it compares to all the way back to 2017. Those kind of lighter shades of yellow show the other Q1s. It's the best Q1 we've ever seen for Hamilton. And when you kind of scan across the board here, it's actually a top 5 quarter that we've seen in Hamilton too. So it's very good, especially when you're considering, again, when it is a Q1, when Q1s are typically the lowest values, and it takes a bit to kind of get going as the Q4s really see the culmination, a lot of action throughout the year. Also fantastic to see 99 transactions total took place in Q1 for 2022, especially when you compare it to Q4 of last year. Again, Q4s are the bigger quarters. And so it was fantastic to see that momentum was carried over into Q1, that level of activity was continued into Q1. And when you look year over year, where they had 77 transactions last year, a 25% increase, fantastic to see. So very, very good Q1 so far. And this is a bit complicated to see, but what I would like to focus on is the blue line here, which is 2022. So this looks at the number of transactions per month throughout the years. And so we had a bit of an unorthodox year. As you can see, we had about 40 transactions take place in January. It really dipped down in February, but then really picks itself back up as the highest volume transactions we've seen in any month throughout the last several years. So a bit weird to see this, but I don't think this is going to have a total impact overall throughout the year. I think we're going to start to see transactions, maybe a record level of transactions throughout. It's a bit early to tell since Q1, but if things continue to continue at that 40 transaction mark, then we're going to see some high levels for the end of the year. So overall, I think it was a healthy quarter going forward. The cream of the crop, industrial land. So the gold here shows the transactions that took place this quarter. The white shows Q1 of last year. So you can see ICI, industrial, commercial, institutional land, huge investment into that sector for this quarter. Also residential land, saw a huge investment into that this quarter as well. Industrial kept pace with last year. Mixed use, retail saw a nice bump, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then multi-res didn't keep to the same standards that we've typically seen. As you can see, almost hit 100 million last year. But a big part of that was one of the largest transactions we saw last year was in multi-res at this time. And that was a $54 million purchase for an apartment building located downtown in Hamilton. So that makes up the big chunk in difference right there. And then office, you saw maybe a slight increase. But overall, almost across the board, everywhere you see huge increases or even just increases in general. But industrial land and residential land are the two stories that really kind of are carrying this quarter. And we've seen this in other quarters too, where it's just, we don't have enough industrial availability rates really compressed. We don't have enough places to live. And that's what you're seeing really continuing to drive investments in land in general, really in Hamilton. So next, I want to talk about the largest transactions that took place. I'm going to talk about the top 3 transactions that took place, so the most expensive transactions that took place in Hamilton. And I'll talk about a couple of honorable mentions that are worth noting as well later on too. But this is that where the retail kind of component comes in. So $18 million value, and that's huge when you come back to this, where you say it's about 25 million. So a really big chunk of the retail transactions were in this one transaction here. And it's in this quasi area. It's industrial, it's a retail. It's located in the Stony Creek industrial kind of complex. But as you can see, it's Stony Creek furniture. So it's that retail use. So it's kind of in this weird area where you see a lot of what I believe how industrial is growing, or one of the reasons why industrial is growing, because you have a facility that can accommodate traditional retail uses at a fraction of the cost, or competitive to rates that are to traditional malls and retail complexes. And it's kind of going into these areas where it's a little bit more competitive, as I mentioned. So $18 million total transaction deal by Axia Real Assets, and they're a newer group out of Toronto, starting to make their foothold here in Hamilton. Over 100,000 square feet at $172 a square foot. Huge value here. I would say last year, but industrial value average for Hamilton is 160. But when you get into building sizes of this scale, especially 100,000 square feet or plus, you usually see the values maybe diminish a little bit. But very, very strong here. 172 is fantastic. And I feel like every time you see a new transaction, not even industrial, but in the land side too, it's always kind of pushing the market level a little bit more. And I think this one really does as well. And also interesting enough to really kind of see in context some of the value that's been generated in Hamilton is this was last purchased in 2018. So about 4 years ago by Timber Creek for 9.2 million. So to go up double in value in 4 years is absolutely phenomenal. And I think, again, that goes in part to some of the retail uses going to industrial, and you're starting to see some of the values increase. Rental rates are starting to increase. Availability rates are decreasing. Cap rates are compressing, and you kind of have this perfect storm where this value is being generated towards. And right now, you're seeing the average industrial rate getting to the double digits, about $10, $11 for Hamilton, which is really good to see. Second largest transaction was this one on 20 Road, 6140. $18.6 million. Panatoni was a purchaser, and that name sounds familiar. They're a very big firm, but they also purchased one of the first purchases of land by the Hamilton Airport, which is seeing a frenzy of activity right now. And they recently just completed Amazon's warehouse right there by the airport. And so now they're kind of going a little bit more east now towards Stony Creek Mountain on 20 Road, and they purchased about 25 acres for about $750 an acre. Which is about average right now for industrial land is what you're seeing. So just a good buy overall. Something to note here where you see a Lafarge at the bottom there. So in that ambitious court street there, BD Construction, which also purchased land by the airport as well, purchased 7.6 acres for $1.5 million an acre, which is the largest value I've ever seen per acre price for industrial land. It just really goes to emphasize the demand for industrial land and how values are just really skyrocketing now. And again, Panatoni BD purchasing again, so it's fantastic to see not just large developers kind of come into the market and really recognize it as a place where value can be generated, but continued value is going to be generated too. And then the most expensive purchase was this one, 9555 Airport Road, $37 million by Hopewell Development, bigger group. They have a presence in almost every major Canadian city and also in the US. And they purchased land right across from the airport. Again, I feel like we talk about a transaction that happens at the airport almost every quarter. 50 acres at about $700,000 an acre. And as I mentioned, about $750 an acre is what we're seeing for market right now. But this is also especially fantastic for the size, similar to industrial where you see maybe a little bit of a discount on the scale. Same thing is true for land, and to see almost market for this amount of land is really phenomenal value. So really interesting to see what eventually goes here, and there's going to be a ton of activity going in the airport for the next 5 to 10 years. So a couple of the notable transactions I want to touch on was this one, 1284 Main Street East, purchased for $15.1 million by New Horizon Development Group, and they're a local residential development group, and probably I would say the most active development group in the last 1 or 2 years at the very least. And they purchased Delta Secondary School. It's about 6 acres of land. The school is zone heritage, so they have to keep definitely at least the front half component of the building. Purchased it for $2.4 million. Something to keep note of is on the LRT route. Something to compare this to, though, is that they did a very, very similar purchase of another school further east in Hamilton for $11.25 million, 7 acres, so very kind of similar in context. But they have a proposal ongoing for that site, so maybe something to keep in mind of what potentially can go here. That proposal is for 12 stories and 1,400 units, so that would be absolutely massive to instill into this specific transaction, but it'll just have to be a wait and see. And so there's this transaction that I talked about. This is further east, that 1842 site, and this is what they're planning there. So huge density. I don't know if we'll see that at the Delta Secondary. They, like I mentioned, they do have to keep a big chunk of the existing school as it is heritage. But one to keep an eye on, and we'll definitely keep an eye on, and we'll mention it in the subsequent quarters that follow. And then the last transaction I want to talk about, this is a fairly big deal locally. 115 Houston Street North, also known as the Tivoli Theater, and then Wilson Street, which is the retail plaza adjacent to it to the south there. Together, it was purchased for $16.25 million. Society Developments is the purchaser, development group based out of Burlington, I believe. In total, 1.3 acres, so a great chunk of land located right in the core of the city. This is James Street right here, and then this is Wilson and York Street over here, and they also have frontage on Houston. Purchased it for $12.5 million an acre, which is huge value. That's market for top tier and high density residential land. Usually, when you see something for that, it's actually pretty rare to see $12.5 million an acre. I think that's really kind of pushing the market again. But that's for like 30 stories, which is maximum height developable for Hamilton, more or less. But the site doesn't possess that right now, so really interesting to see that. Right now, you can build up to 74 meters, which is in the 20 range for stories. On the Tivoli portion, and the retail plaza below, you can build 44 meters high. So that's not the heights that really indicate the value that they purchased it at. But something that's interesting to keep in mind is that in developments purchased in the bottom left here, the city center mall, and they're planning to do 4 or 5 maximum height story condos there. And then across the street over here, this parking lot was purchased by First Avenue Council, also known as Emblem Developments, and they want to do 3 30-story towers. So you do have very close by neighboring developments of approaching maximum density. So it'll be interesting to see if Society Developments wants to do something very similar, and how that eventually incorporates into the downtown fabric, as James Street in general has a 44 meter height limit. And so it'll be interesting to see if they're able to exceed that if they want to, but again, the purchase price does kind of point in that direction. Getting into the news, so I'm going to go into the news and I'm going to go back and forth between new developments that were talked about in Q1, some updates of developments that we've talked about in quarters past, and then interspersed with some relevant news as well. So just at the beginning, I didn't really find any of these developments that kind of fit into anything, but we're definitely noteworthy is that Hamilton had a banner year in 2021 for film. As you see, film is continuing to be a very valid mode of economy for the city. I think we made about $70 million worth of direct spending from the film industry last year, a huge number, and it's going to be continuing on for this year, it looks like, as well. The Pier 8 project, I get constant questions about this project. It's a very big project in Hamilton, and it looks like construction is going to begin next year, and then with potentially pre-sale starting in the fall, so keep an eye on that. And then a big chunk of investment from the Ford government, $500 million given to ArcelorMittal to kickstart their green steel transformation. Total to $1.8 billion project, and I think they already received the exact same sum from the feds last year as well. So really excited to see how a core business, of course, of Hamilton steelmaking is going to be transformed into some greener technology. The Census came out as well and revealed Hamilton's downtown as one of the densest in Canada. I believe it's the 5th most dense core in the country, followed by Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary. Among 32,000 residents were increased in those past 5 years from 2016 to 2021 in Hamilton, and nearly 70% of them live within the core, and they consider that to be a 20-minute drive from the core. Hamilton's population has nearly doubled its rate of growth, which is fantastic to see. And more people moved here in the past half decade alone than from 2001 to 2011. So that's fantastic. Again, and you're seeing, I didn't include the graph, but the big areas of growth for this kind of 5-year period, the 2021 census, was Waterdown, where you're seeing a lot of suburban development that's growing on over there. Stony Creek Mountain, which I touched on, that 20 road industrial development. So you're seeing residential growth there. You're seeing industrial growth there. And then the core itself as well. You're seeing a ton of growth in the core, which is fantastic to see for Hamilton downtown as well. But as the last point here in this article says, what's driving it? And you hear it maybe colloquially or anecdotally, that people from Toronto are coming to Hamilton. And it seems like a lot of the StatsCan data, or some of the StatsCan data, is pointing towards that. So this graph here at the top right kind of shows the overall population increase in Hamilton has been really, really good. You see half of 2021 here, but again, this is from July 1st, 2021. So it's only taking half of the 2021 year there. But it's a bit hard to see, so I'll explain it a little bit more here. As you see in 2020 and 2021, this green bar, it represents net interprovincial migration, and that means people from within the province moving to Hamilton. And you see it's a huge jump up considering you look at any other year, really. In the last kind of the pandemic years, 2019, 2020, and 2021, people moving from within the province to Hamilton. That's a direct indication of people looking for affordability, in my opinion. And you're seeing a huge population increase also in this dark blue, which represents net international migration. So a lot of immigrants are coming to Hamilton as well. And you can see 2021 it was affected obviously because of the pandemic in this case. So huge growth that was seen in the last 5 years, and it's going to be continuing on as we see lots of developments and an increase in immigration and people moving from other parts of the province into Hamilton. So some new developments that were talked about this past quarter was Radio Arts, and this is a 14-story development at 206 King Street West. So this is the corner of King and Caroline, 122 units. Developer here is Canlight Realty, and it's across from McMaster Graduate Residence, which is already being built right now. It's just another fantastic development to see in downtown Hamilton. Something I started noticing this year was a bit smaller, or this quarter, I should say, smaller developments, infill developments, gentle density. They all have kind of various names. But this is a newer one that popped up. Usually I wouldn't talk about these, but it's just a trend I've been seeing right now that I want to kind of put a spotlight on. So this one's a 6-story development, 20 units, located on 647 King Street East. And then very similarly, this one, 433 King Street East, 6 stories, again, 20 units, both are rentals, I should mention. Both are located on the LRT route. And then we talked about this one. This one's a bit bigger, as you can see, and longer because it was an assembly, but also located on King Street East, 6 stories, 102 residential units. Just a really interesting trend is this is a screenshot of the Hamilton zoning bylaw, and you can see the purple shaded areas labeled as TOC1. And what that means is Transit-Oriented Core 1 or Corridor 1, and that's a specific zoning. It's a relatively new zoning the city put in place. And you can see it's King Street East there, and that's where the proposed LRT right's supposed to go. And this zoning is supposed to kind of be working tandem with that new infrastructure that's coming in place to really kind of provide the same uses that you find downtown plus residential. But however, you're able to add a little more density, as you can see in those 3 proposals, about 6 stories, rather than what's currently right now at 3 stories. So these are in the yellow, you can see those 3 developments I talked about. They're all kind of in between Wentworth and Victoria. So right downtown, maybe a little bit just east of it, but I think this is exactly what the city envisioned when they put the zoning in place to really encourage some gentle density, as maybe they would call it, along a proposed and future infrastructure that's going to carry the city forward. So phenomenal to see this. And I think even the Radio Arts building is on King Street East on the LRT route too. So kind of in the same vein, but since it's in the downtown secondary plan, they're able to build a little bit higher. But I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to see something like these projects continue in Hamilton, even further east, a little bit away from downtown, especially when you can get them at some great prices. Like a few of these went for about $500,000, $700,000. So if you can get them at those prices, you can do a fairly nice scaled size development in the core of Hamilton. Speaking of LRT, not much news on that front. It's just the last we talked about, it has been approved, but it still seems to be quite some years away. And this article says 2 years away for major construction, and Metrolinx is working behind the scenes as bidding could begin this summer. Updated news on this development. We talked about this years ago, but this is closer to Dundas and Main Street West. So OLT has approved this development to move forward. It's 9 stories, 160 units, in addition, 22 townhomes at the back. So it'd be great to see if this can move along forward. It'd be great to get some density in the West End there. And then this one is also announced too. This is called Style Park. This is 22 Cannon Street East. So this is on the corner of Houston and Cannon. And you can see it's a brick and beam building, was built in 1911, really beautiful building, but it's a copy building, which if you know in Hamilton is the soup manufacturer still existing to this day. 66,000 square feet, and they want to do office. So obviously office is a bit of a bugaboo right now. If lots of people are not going in the full week, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 days a week, right? So it'll be interesting to see if this project will help maybe attract some more office users, if they'll maybe include some features that will attract office users that we haven't seen. Something I should also mention that I haven't yet is that they're planning on building a restaurant on top of the building too. So maybe that's an attractor for employees. And it'll be interesting to see if both employees and employers will want this type of space. It'll be really nice to see how this project progresses. And I think it'll be a good kind of watermark or litmus test for office in Hamilton. Just to round it out here right now, we talked about last Q4, the biggest transaction last year was the Eastgate Square Mall. And it was now revealed in Q1 that Harrison Equity Partners are the purchasers there. And so in conjunction with that, what was maybe the most exciting development that was revealed in Q1 was 200 Centennial Parkway North. And this is a development by Smart Living, which is the residential arm of Smart Centers, that's a very famous plaza owner. And it's going to be a multi-phase development. They want to do 4 mixed-use towers. You can see that still that shiny buildings in the background there, what's being proposed. They also own the remainder of this plaza here, and this is a Food Basics grocery store. The whole plaza in total is about 13 acres. The development they want to do, though, is 1150 residential units, so huge development. The first phase includes 2 towers of 15 and 20 stories. So I think those would be the tallest ones. You can go over 14 stories here based on the Centennial Parkway secondary plan. So I'm interested to see specifically the Centennial Parkway North. There is a GO station that's going there. You do have the LRT, which is being anchored at Eastgate Mall, which is just down the road from here. And there is a secondary plan, as I mentioned, for this corridor right here, Centennial Parkway. So it'll be really interesting to see if Smart Living is joined by some other landowners on this corridor to promote some density and residential growth for this side of Hamilton. So that's it for me in the update here. So Q1 Hamilton market update, that rounds it out. So fantastic to see this previous Q1 was the best Q1 we've ever seen for Hamilton. I think it really indicates that there's going to be continued strong growth, specifically in the industrial sector, in the residential sector. It'll be interesting to see if retail kind of keeps it up a little bit more. And something we didn't talk about right now because there hasn't really been a development, but the Hamilton Council famously voted on doing the urban boundary freeze. Province has publicly stated that they called it anti-housing. So eventually you see if that moves forward, and if it does, where other areas of the city tend to grow. As I mentioned, we've seen water down right now. We're seeing Stony Creek Mountain, Nebo Road. That's an area of growth, but downtown is definitely growing. But it's not just towers. You're starting to see, as I mentioned, small gentle intensification along the LRT route. Starting to see what New Horizon Development Group is doing, kind of purchasing parcels of land outside the core. So it'll be interesting to see if this is continuing forward. And again, touching back into the industrial land, I think it's going to continue growing around the airport. You're going to start seeing this new pocket, Stony Creek Mountain, Nebo Road, 20 Road. And then also the adoption of further industrial and multi-residential that's existing into the portfolio, especially now as interest rates increase and maybe home ownership is starting to become a little bit more unattainable, even on the condo side, or just seem to be a bit more affordable option. If rental living is starting to become more of a reality, if that becomes more of an adoption towards that asset class too for investors. So overall, again, just to round it out, Q1, fantastic quarter. I think we're going to see a great quarter in Q2, as traditionally we've seen Q2s be on par with Q1 at the very least. And that'll be sometime in July. So keep an eye out for those updates. It's going to be still a few months away, but we'll have our Q2 sometime in July. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to just write back at the newsletters that we send out, and I'm happy to answer any questions at any time for anyone. Okay. Thank you, and have a good day.